Okay, so moving swiftly on, I wanted to talk to you today about medical freedom, and I wanted to really think about why this is such an important principle to uphold and protect in a humane and civilised society. And I've got Naomi to thank for the next slide. She found this really, really great quote from a Dutch professor of law, philosopher and founder of Reformational philosophy in 1923, and he said, "The government may not, according to God's ordinances, force the ethically free man to accept physical treatment in any form. The ethical person alone is appointed by God as the keeper and caretaker of the body." So I thought that was a really good place to frame this. And before I introduce myself properly, I'm going to start with a short video, a 2-minute clip of a far better speaker than I am, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who you may have come across. You've probably got some fans here. He's one of my heroes. He's the son of Bobby Kennedy, the US senator who was assassinated. He's the nephew of JFK, the US president, who was also assassinated. He is an environmental lawyer and he's a prominent medical freedom advocate and campaigner. He's also a devout Catholic. And this is from a speech that he went to Switzerland and Italy a couple of weeks ago and toured around making lots of speeches. And this is a couple of minutes, just which I felt really summed up where we're at the moment. I hope you can hear it. He's got problems with his voice, so you just have to focus on what he's saying.
My father told me when I was a child, people in authority lie. And we all, if we are going to continue to live in a democracy, we need to understand that people in authority lie. People in authority will abuse every power that we relinquish to them. And right now, we are giving them the power to micromanage every bit of our lives 24 hours a day. They're going to know where we are. They're going to know the money that we spend. They're going to have access to our children. They're going to have the right to compel unwanted medical interventions on us. The Nazis did that in the camps in World War II. They tested vaccines on gypsies and Jews. And the world was so horrified after the war, we signed the Nuremberg Charter. And we all pledged when we do that, we would never again impose unwanted medical interventions on human beings without informed consent. And yet in 2 years, all of that conviction has suddenly disappeared. And people are walking around in masks where the science has not been explained to them. They are doing what they're told. They are these government agencies are orchestrating obedience. And it is not democratic. It's not the product of democracy. It's the product of a pharmaceutical-driven biosecurity agenda that will enslave the entire human race and plunge us into a dystopian nightmare where the apocalyptical forces of ignorance and greed will be running our lives and ruining our children and destroying all the dreams and dignity that we hope to give to our children.
So hang on, I'll just move on to the next slide. So thank you to Bobby Kennedy for that. So a little bit about me. So when I was thinking, what are the important things, my passions in my life? So I would say, first of all, I have been a lifelong Christian, but I would say that my faith has grown enormously and deepened over the last 2 years. And I think it has been my faith that has given me a wider spiritual and moral perspective on what's been going on. And I remember at the very beginning, and my daughter's here, she will remember I said back in March when there was all the hype starting, and I just said, don't buy into the fear, don't buy into it. And I kept saying that, and at the time I did not know where we were going, but my instinct was we don't live in fear. So that's where I started in last March. So I am a wife, I am a mother of 4 amazing teenage, or nearly teenage, one of them, children. I was a doctor. I practiced medicine for 6 years. I then gave up work to raise my children. And then about 10 years ago, I retrained in complementary medicine, and I now see patients in my own home. So I've worked with healthcare and trying to support people for most of my adult life. So all of these factors, I would say, led me to set up the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, which started in October 2020. So I have been studying the data, the studies. I'd been listening to independent scientists and doctors. I felt that by September, October, I could have done a PhD in COVID. It's sort of become my full-time job and obsession since March. And I could see very clearly where we were heading. I could see we'd already lost a lot of our human rights, and I could see there was a big threat to our medical freedom. And at this point in time, last year, there was no medical freedom movement in the UK because we had never needed one. There are very big medical freedom movements in Australia, in America, because they have mandated vaccination in some states to get to school, but we hadn't ever needed that. Medical treatment had been voluntary. But I could see coming after the mask mandates, which is also an infringement of your medical freedom, you may not have thought about it like that, that vaccine mandates and vaccine passports were coming. So I thought we better do something about it, and no one else was. So we started the UK Medical Freedom Alliance. And we got together a group of doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, scientists and lawyers. And our platform is to campaign for medical freedom, informed consent and bodily autonomy to be preserved and protected. And so the specific areas we've been looking at are we want fully informed consent for all testing, medical treatments, interventions, including masks and vaccines. We want to uphold the right for the freedom to refuse testing and all of the other medical treatments without any penalties and without any restrictions. We are very keen that there is full transparency of safety and effectiveness data on trials, which, as Jonathan has very clearly shown, has not been happening. Because without that data, we cannot independently scrutinise it and evaluate it, and that means that fully informed consent is not possible. We supported the Great Barrington Declaration, which was, you may have heard of, in October 2021, so about the same time that we started. It was an approach to handling pandemics which was a humane and ethical approach where you protected the most vulnerable but allowed herd immunity to develop safely, limiting the collateral damage, the non-pandemic damage to society. As it stands, that has now been signed by 60,000 medical doctors and scientists and nearly 1 million concerned citizens. But yet, obviously, it's been discredited. So we have been working hard. We have a website, and I do encourage all of you to go and have a look at it. We've had two approaches. One is to lobby government and decision makers, but the other has been to produce tools to educate and empower the public so that they can uphold their own medical freedom rights and they feel empowered to do so. We've got a team of about 50 of us at the moment, and we've been working across with other campaign groups more and more as the pandemic's gone on. So we've written open letters which are all fully referenced and argued on all sorts of topics, testing, vaccine passports, COVID policies, prevention and treatments, children's vaccines. So if there's any topic that you want to know what the evidence is, go to our website and have a look find one of the letters. There's 43 of them. We've written letters to head teachers for people to download and give to their head teacher as to why the children's vaccine shouldn't happen, and we completely stand behind Jonathan's call today for an immediate moratorium. I think that absolutely goes without saying. There's public information leaflets, and we've got a very good resource on children's COVID vaccines, which we update every couple of weeks. And it's just a lot of links in different sections to help people to start looking into children's vaccines. So like all the open letters written around the world by doctors, you've just got them and you can actually look into them. Reports of injury, and just got the links. So it just helps people because a lot of people don't know where to start. So that's the most up-to-date thing for children's vaccines. We've also got some template letters to help you in specific situations, like being told you can't have an operation unless you've been jabbed or unless you've been tested, and for parents to decline masks or testing for their children. So things like that, so have a look at those. And very recently, we've joined together with the Alliance for Natural Health International to set up an organisation called PROMIC, or an umbrella organisation, which is Professionals for Medical Informed Consent and Non-Discrimination. And this website is very specifically to host medical exemption forms for the vaccine. There's one that is designed for you to self-exempt yourself, and there's one designed for a health professional to sign. And again, it sets out some of the law and some of the reasons, and basically they're designed that anybody can self-exempt. But it helps people to have that conversation with their doctors, because I think that's what we need to start doing. We need to start going to our GP and say, I want you to exempt me. This is why. Here's my form. Why won't you sign it? Because we can't fight this, just from the campaign groups. We really do need everyone on board now having these difficult conversations. So you'll see actually there's quite a few slides of quotes from the founding fathers in America in my talk, because I think they had an incredible wisdom that they were, I believe 95% of them were Christians. It was a very, a society founded on Christian values and also Christian faith. And so he said, the greatest tyrannies are always perpetuated in the name of the noblest causes. And I think that's what we've seen, every time you question anything, because COVID, to keep people safe. And we just have to be very careful. This there's nothing new under the sun, is there? And so 250 years ago, Thomas Paine recognised there was this issue. So, how has your medical freedom been impacted with the COVID policies? Well, I think it's very clear from what Jonathan was showing us that all medical treatments and vaccines come with risks of harm as well as benefits. So they must be subject to informed consent and they must be voluntary. To mandate any medical treatment is unethical and immoral. We have to draw a line somewhere where we will not go further. And the right to control what goes into our own bodies is non-negotiable. But we have seen people, including children, forced to wear face masks for hours a day. We've seen COVID testing mandates for travelling, for school children, for employment. We've seen, obviously, the COVID vaccine mandates, which shockingly have now been brought in for care home workers. We've lost tens of thousands of care home workers overnight in a sector which was already on its knees. So how can that be about health and caring for the elderly? And now we're looking at whole populations being talked about, being mandated to have an experimental vaccine, such as Austria and possibly Germany. And then we have the horror of the COVID vaccine and testing passes for access to just the most basic services of life. Restaurants, cafes, education, travel, and even churches. So I think this has been an absolutely unprecedented removal of the basic human rights and freedoms of assembly, travel, work, worship, and based on government-mandated medicine. And this idea, which is completely new, that we have to prove we're not carrying a virus. We should not have to prove we are healthy. So as an ex-doctor and a passionate advocate of medicine, I think we need to think about how is medicine practiced safely and ethically, and there are some key cornerstones of medicine which we are really challenging with the way that things are going. So first of all, the doctor-patient relationship has always been considered to be sacred. It's based on confidentiality. Well, we can see how we're losing that. We're having to, people, random strangers are asking you, have you been vaccinated? What's your test result? Do a lateral flow test. Where's the confidentiality? And the patient-centered care. That means the doctor's first duty is to care for his or her patient and their own needs based on their own individual circumstances, which is physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual. It's everything. We're all different. We all have different needs. And it's only with that sacred doctor-patient relationship that you get trust, and the doctor will advocate for the patient. And I think you can see how this is being stripped away. Patients are saying, I want to have a vaccine exemption, and their doctors are refusing. And they're saying, I can't do that, I can't give you one. Even if the patient has had, we've heard of people who've had one jab, had a terrible reaction, and they won't be exempted from the next jab. Or people who've had anaphylaxis being told, well, just go to the hospital for your next jab, and then we'll make sure we can resuscitate you. I mean, this is insanity. This is not how we practice medicine. If you gave penicillin in the past to somebody who was known to be anaphylactic to penicillin, you'd be struck off. You'd be in front of the GMC. That's not how you practice medicine. So, and there's sort of building on that, three concepts to this practice of ethical medicine. The first do no harm, which is also kind of interchangeably used with the term the Hippocratic Oath. We've got bodily autonomy and informed consent. So here's Hippocrates. Primum non nocere, first do no harm. So this code was attributed to Hippocrates. He was a Greek physician about nearly 2,500 years ago. But it's still upheld today across the world by doctors and used as the founding principle of medical ethics. It has been updated numerous times. It's more secular now because it did used to swear on the Greek gods. But it gives moral guidance and accountability to physicians. And the key points to this practice of medicine by a doctor are that the benefits of treatment must outweigh the risks for that individual. That's the first do no harm. There is the confidentiality. There is the, even in those days, they were told do not conduct research without patient permission. And there's also the duty to pass knowledge on to the next generation of doctors. Now, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but September 2021, how many people knew that there was a big summit held in Rome where they launched the Rome Declaration? Is anyone aware of that? Okay, it's interesting, isn't it, that the BBC didn't report this? Okay, well, this is what I see as the modern day declaration of the principles of the Hippocratic Oath. So it was, held in September. There was an international alliance of doctors and medical scientists, and you've probably heard of some of these names if you've been following this. So Dr. Robert Malone, who is the inventor of the technology behind the mRNA and DNA vaccines, he read the declaration. Dr. Geert van den Bosch, he's a very, very eminent vaccinologist who's worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's worked for Gavi. He's spent his whole life and career, he's quite old now. Well, not that old, probably about my age, but maybe in his probably 50s. He's spent his whole life developing vaccines. He is not an anti-vaxxer. You have Pierre Corey, Dr. Pierre Corey, who's the head of the Frontline Critical Care COVID Alliance in America, who are treating patients with early treatment. You've got Peter McCullough, who's the most eminent doctor. I mean, he's my absolute hero. Paul Alexander, Tess Lawrie, who's a UK doctor who runs the evidence-based medicine consultancy. So these doctors and many more on the stage reading out this declaration where they condemned global government COVID policies, and they even used the word crimes against humanity. And they reclaimed and invoked the Hippocratic Oath and its fundamental principles for humane and ethical medicine. And now it has been signed by almost 13,000 doctors. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes, it's worth spending some time actually looking at some of the statements that they made, because it's absolutely extraordinary that these eminent doctors, and now 2,700 doctors around the world, have signed their names to this. So they've said things like, we are united and loyal to the Hippocratic Oath. The profession of medicine as we know it is at a crossroads. And that it's our utmost responsibility and duty to uphold and restore the dignity, art, and science of medicine. They've noted that there's an unprecedented assault on our ability to care for our patients. That policymakers are forcing a one-size-fits-all treatment strategy, which is resulting in needless illness and death. And that they want to uphold the individualised, personalised approach to patient care. They note that physicians are being discouraged from engaging in open professional discourse, and that thousands of physicians are being prevented from providing treatment to their patients. I mean, how can that be? And these guys, I mean, they don't say this lightly. So this is a quote from the declaration. They say, "This is not medicine. This is not care. These policies may actually constitute crimes against humanity." So the measures they're calling for to restore the practice of ethical science-based medicine, they say that the political intrusion into the practice of medicine and the physician-patient relationship must end. That all physicians must be free to practice the art and science of medicine without fear of retribution, censorship, slander, or disciplinary action. It just shows what is going on behind the scenes and how we have got into this mess. I think John very eloquently explained how it felt to be a pastor at the moment, when everybody around you is just not speaking the truth. And I think these doctors are saying the same thing is happening in medicine. So they want physicians to defend their right to prescribe treatment, observing the tenet first do no harm. So we're back to the 2,500 years ago, that recognition of what needed to be in place for medicine to be practiced ethically and safely. And then they've met more recently, a couple of months ago, actually November, in Florida, and they've updated the declaration. And so there's some of the figures there on the stage, you'll recognise them, no doubt, some of you. And they've come to 3 more updates: that healthy children shall not be subject to forced vaccination, which in the States is becoming a reality. There are going to be kids who can't go to school. That naturally immune persons recovered from SARS-CoV-2 shall not be subject to any restriction or vaccine mandates, because natural immunity is literally being written out of science and medicine, which is, you know, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, are we not? You know, our immune systems, when I learnt medicine, the more I learnt, the more incredible, you know, the more my faith deepened, because what we have inside us is just more intricate than any drug or any vaccine could come close to replicating. And also that all health agencies and institutions shall cease interfering with physicians treating individual patients. So back to my founding fathers. This was Thomas Jefferson, the star of the musical Hamilton, you will probably know. So he said, very wisely, if people let government decide what foods they eat and medicines they take, their bodies will soon be in as sorry a state as are the souls of those who live under tyranny. And I think we kind of are facing both of those issues at the moment. So to sort of build on what he says, Why is medical freedom a fundamental right that's non-negotiable? And I think it comes down to the question, who owns your body? Is it you, or is it the state and society? And the things that, the two sort of principles behind this, bodily autonomy, that is the fundamental and, I believe, sacred right of each human being to self-determination over their own body. This is a sacred right, and it must be defended. And actually, if you think about it, it is the foundation on which all other human rights are built. If you cross this line, once you don't have agency over what goes into your body, you effectively become an agent or a slave of the state or authorities or whoever is mandating medical interventions on your body. And this principle of bodily autonomy is enacted and protected by laws around informed consent, which is the process by which an individual gives permission before they receive any type of medical treatment, test or examination. For informed consent to be valid, it must be voluntary and informed on the basis of an explanation by a clinician. That clinician must share the risks, the benefits, and any alternatives to treatments. And critically, it must not be influenced by pressure. And in the NHS constitution, it says by medical staff, friends, or family. Now, I wonder how many people have been experiencing pressure to take a medical treatment from friends or family. It's against the NHS constitution and probably against the law. The person consenting obviously must have the capacity to make decisions. So there are rare cases where you don't have capacity, in which case power of attorney or someone else may take that. But for most of us, while we're in our sound minds, we have the right to informed consent. Now, there's many, many laws and codes that underpin this all around the world. You will be familiar, no doubt, this is probably one of the most famous ones, the Nuremberg Code. After the war, the Second World War, there were the Nuremberg trials, which included the doctors' trial. These Nazi doctors had committed atrocities. They were tried for crimes against humanity, war crimes and experimentation. And 7 were acquitted, 7 got death sentences, and about another 7 were imprisoned. And from this, we drew up the Nuremberg Code in 1947, which regarded ethical and permissible human research. Because as Jonathan's pointed out, these vaccines are still in experimental trial phase, so we are all in one massive population experiment. And the Nuremberg Code says the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. You can read the rest. But it says no element, this is quite interesting, of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or any other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. Now, the Nuremberg Code itself is not legally binding, although it is a code that most countries have signed up to, but there are legally binding laws around this. So you've got the EU Charter of Human Rights, Article 3, which is the right to integrity of the person, which enshrines free and informed consent. The UK Supreme Court made a really important judgment called Montgomery in 2015. Previously, there had been the Bolam test, which was quite a paternalistic approach, where all the doctor had to do was act in line with a responsible body of medical opinion. This judgment, the Montgomery judgment, put the patient at the heart of consent and said that all material risks must be shared and alternatives so that the patient could make informed consent. So that wasn't just the risks that the doctor thought were relevant. They had to think about what would the patient think was important. Then you've got the UN UNESCO Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, the NHS Constitution, as I said. Doctors and nurses have codes of practice, the GMC and the NMC. They are very clear about the doctor's duties to practice informed consent properly. And obviously the US Constitution and Bill of Rights and lots of other laws around the world. So if we think specifically about the vaccines, it's just quite interesting to see how informed consent has been undermined. So I would say the risks, and thank you very much again, Jonathan, for sort of putting these so clearly, have not been clearly stated and have perhaps been actively hidden. We're seeing censorship of doctors and sciences. There's no balanced debate in the media. Then the benefits from the absolute risk reduction or the relative risk reduction, as we saw, are being overstated so that you get misleading headlines, 90% or 95%. But more worryingly, I think even than that, we have seen just unprecedented use of coercion, blackmail and threats. So we've had the propaganda 24/7 from the government, the media. We've had the use of fear, the pandemic of the unvaccinated. There's been a social pressure that's been created. This term anti-vaxxers, the hate speech, we're becoming the untouchables. Then there's been the extraordinary spectacle of bribery to have a vaccine. In the States, it's been particularly bad. They've had free food, cinema tickets, lottery entry to win $1 million, money. People are being paid to have vaccines. And then the latest one I heard was in Austria, you could get 30 minutes with a sex worker if you had a vaccine. I mean, it's just, you know, it just doesn't feel real, actually. And then people are being threatened, which is far more horrific. So people are literally losing their jobs and going on the breadline. They're losing their ability to travel, which may mean they can't see family or friends. And in Austria, they tried for a few days a lockdown of the unvaccinated. And I do not know how they decided that hadn't worked after 2 or 3 days. But I suspect it was more about creating social pressure and the sort of hatred of division in society. And now we have the spectacle of population mandates being threatened. And there are some countries already who are, I think Indonesia has got a mandate on their whole population to have the vaccines, or it might be the Philippines, somewhere over in Asia somewhere. So I'm sure there's lots of people here, because of the the way things have been, who've actually had your vaccine already. And so I'd be really curious as to whether you actually feel you were able to give fully informed consent. And I think that every person who has been vaccinated should have been told and had discussed the following. So you should have been told that it was being used under temporary emergency use authorization, that the trials were not complete yet, and wouldn't be completed till at least 2023, so that they were experimental. You should have been told that this was using a novel gene-based technology. The mRNA and the DNA viral vector vaccines are both a new type of technology. That there was, because of the rush, limited short-term safety data. The trials were based, the interim trial results that allowed the authorization were based on 2 months of safety data. There's no long-term safety data at all. There is not a single person on this planet who's had these vaccines inside them for more than, 18 months? So we don't know if there's going to be any effect on things that might take a while to show: fertility, cancers, autoimmunity, other diseases. We're already seeing some serious safety signals in the adverse event reporting data from VAERS, which is America, Yellow Card, the UK, you've got the UDRA Vigilance in Europe, you've got the WHO VigiAccess. All of these databases, which are official databases and the only safety reporting databases that seem to exist, are showing levels thousands of times higher than we've ever seen for any other vaccine. So we've got more deaths reported in the States now from this one vaccine in 9 months than they have done for all of the vaccines they've ever used for 35 years. So that is a safety signal, I would say. You've got the known potential risks, which are gradually being sort of added as we've found them in the population. So we had the clots, we had the people with these rare clotting and bleeding disorders, VITT, myocarditis, which is becoming more and more in the press, and that's been added as a concern. Guillain-Barré disease, that's a paralyzing disorder. Other neurological conditions, anaphylaxis, that was obvious in the first week or two when lots of people started collapsing. cardiac events and deaths. Then, of course, you've got the short-lived protection. It's now very clear that by 6 months the protection's gone. That should be a factor you should be told about in informed consent, because if this was going to last a lifetime, it may make you feel differently than if it's going to last 4 or 5 months. That will bring the possible need for repeated boosters, which no one was told about well, really until about July. So all the people who had it before then weren't told that this might not be it, because I think a lot of people thought, I'll just have these 2 and then I can just get back to normal. And I think that was a missell, really. It doesn't prevent infection or transmission. So many people have had this to protect other people when they weren't scared of the virus, when they'd probably had it and they were young, but they thought they really should look after other people. They should have been told, no, it only protects you in the sense that it will reduce the amount of symptoms you get, hopefully, for a short time. Your own individual risk from COVID-19 should have been discussed. You know, the risk-benefit analysis for a 25-year-old compared to an 85-year-old with 2 or 3 comorbidities is very different. And the decision may be different for those 2 different people. You know, you can't have a one-size-fits-all in medicine. People may have pre-existing medical conditions. Many of those won't have been trialled ever with the vaccine. You need to know that. You need to, because, you know, and again, some people say that's fine, I'll go for that. But if you don't have that information, you're not giving informed consent. So yeah, I mean, I would say we are not anti-vax, you know, this lovely term that people like to call them, but we are pro the choice to decide on the evidence and on your own situation whether you want to take something or not. And it has to be honest and it has to be truthful. People may have naturally acquired immunity. If you've had COVID, you have strong, robust, comprehensive and long-lasting immunity. You gain nothing from a vaccine. So you would have all risks and no benefits. That's, you know, now there's about, I don't know, I think the last count was about 80 studies which confirm this. You know, this is very clear. Alternatives to vaccination. These doctors on their platform were talking about COVID treatments they're not being allowed to give, but there are very effective early treatments if you start early. And also, you should be told who's going to pay out if something goes wrong. The vaccine manufacturers are immune from liability. The government compensation scheme is very hard to get anything out of. It's very long-winded. Your maximum compensation is 120,000, I think, at the moment. And that can take years and years and years to get hold of. You have to prove you are 60% disabled. So I think taking a step backwards, where do we put our trust? Are we going to put our trust in the state or in ourselves, our family, our God-given immune systems? And just, you know, I think Jonathan's covered some of this, but, you know, Big Pharma doesn't have legal liability for any harm or damage. Why? Now, they actually said, and I read this last June, so this is last August. So over a year ago, I was horrified to read that an AstraZeneca spokesman said, this is a unique situation where we as a company simply cannot take the risk if in 4 years the vaccine is showing side effects. That was his explanation as to why they had to have immunity from liability. But why should we have to take the risk with our own health if in 4 or 5 years we find ourselves, you know, damaged beyond repair? There's been some coverage of leaked secret contracts that Pfizer negotiated with all the governments, which are concerning. You can look into that. Their safety data, this has recently been, the FDA have applied to not have to release the safety data that they authorised the vaccine on in full until 2076. There's many thousands of pages, and they're going to put out 500 pages a month. Which will take 54 years to be fully available. As Jonathan said, you've really helped me in my talk. Big Pharma has a long history of civil and criminal convictions, and the 2.3 billion Pfizer healthcare fraud case is the largest criminal and civil healthcare fraud case in history. And I think when you put your whole trust in Big Pharma and state, you see the dehumanisation of medicine. So governments practicing medicine is not safe. They are not doctors. You cannot apply one size fits all. And you lose that sacred doctor-patient relationship, which is your advocate to look after your own needs. And that will lead to medical tyranny, which we are seeing, and a medical apartheid being created. These sort of tyrannies don't end well. So the way I've been seeing it is that over the last 18, 20, 21 months now, there's been two different ideologies at play. You've got your inalienable God-given rights versus the greater good. So your right to life and liberty in the US Bill of Rights, these are inviolable. You can't even violate them to benefit others. And this is underpinned by the Christian worldview that we are all uniquely made in the image of God. We are of infinite value to him, and we must be treated with dignity. And it's the sanctity of life. Now, this has come up very clearly to me against utilitarianism, the greater good, collectivism, whatever you want to call it. And in this ideology, you can allow instrumental harm to the individual because they can be sacrificed if it benefits wider society. And this is a very familiar ideology, which has been used repeatedly in history by totalitarian states, by communist regimes and the like. And it leads, we've seen in history, and it's very obvious, to the dehumanization of the individual. And it's, as I say, it's at odds with Christian teaching and the values that are underpinning our Western civilization. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes looking at a Christian perspective. So this is a very beautiful scripture from Psalm 139. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. So, what is a Christian perspective on medical freedom? And this is so relevant, even if you're not a Christian, because our civilization was built on we were Christendom. So it has Christian values, it has Christian principles, and this is how we have lived over the last few centuries. And it has recognized that each person is a unique being, created by God to be treated with dignity. And it seems to me at this stage, we really need to employ our discernment and scripture to make sure that we are not deceived into false ideology or the worship of false idols. So in Matthew 7:15, and I think this is such an amazing bit of wisdom, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. They look plausible and harmless, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. We need to start looking at the fruits of these policies. And I put together a few pictures. The reality of medical mandates, what do they look like? These are the fruits. So I wonder what you see when you look at these pictures. So I see dehumanization, I see oppression, I see a fear, isolation, I see loneliness, loss of faith, despair, violation, and cruelty. And we have to ask ourselves as Christians, is this from the world, under the evil one, or is this from God? I feel so sad for those care workers and those hospital workers who have worked in the face of what, especially initially, was unknown and possibly extremely dangerous to their health, with no protection. They've worked for nearly 2 years now, and now they're being told if they don't have a jab at this point, they're going to be sacked. The children in schools who are sitting there for hours and hours a day, when they're starting a new school and they can't even see the new people's, the other people's faces, how do you even learn who each other are? It's causing, we know that the fruits of this, children are suffering an epidemic of suicide, anxiety, depression, massive catastrophic mental health problems. We see churches like, I don't know if you can see that picture there, but people just sitting miles away from each other wearing masks. There is no place for a mask in a church. It is a symbol of oppression. To me, it's wearing a lie on your face, because I also know it doesn't work. We've looked at the evidence. But also, there is no place for fear in a church. We have to stand on what we believe. And I have never worn a mask in church, and I have made sure I got in the music group and I sang throughout. But it brings the darkness in. And you can feel, oh ye of little faith is all that was going through my head the other day. And then this poor child at the bottom is having a swab stuck up its nose in the middle of the street by someone in a mask. I mean, what are we doing? And I think when our bodily autonomy, this really fundamental right, is threatened by these mandates, it invokes a massive backlash against human beings. This is not right. We know on some level this is not right, and we are seeing protests all around the world, growing and growing. People are taking to the streets in their hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Again, you won't see this on the BBC, but it is there. A couple of weekends ago, it was, there were millions on the streets in, tens of countries around the world, all at the same time. Mainly peaceful, but what's interesting is that they're coming up against a real violence from the authorities. This is not a society. Is this an improvement to our health and social fabric? So again, that's kind of the fruits that we're looking at. I am coming into land soon. I'm sure I'm running over time. So as Christians, I think we need discernment to know what is from the world and what is from God. And we are told so clearly throughout the Bible that we are in a spiritual battle between good and evil. And I think that is what we have failed to apply to this situation as a church. So we're told the whole world is under the control of the evil one, that they're from the world and speak from the viewpoint of the world, and the world listens to them. So you're going to be popular if you speak with a world view. But we are told clearly, do not conform to the pattern of this world. And we need to test and approve of what God's will is. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. And as you do not belong to the world, that is why the world hates you. And then we're also told to expect hatred, persecution, lies and falsehoods. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, every one of those doctors on that platform who stood up in Rome has been completely their reputations have been destroyed on social media, destroyed all over the internet. They have been fired from their jobs. They have been caught, these are people who've had impeccable careers. And suddenly their whole Wikipedia page has been changed overnight when they speak out. They have been slandered. They have been harassed. They've had death threats. I've been, I'm just a small cog in this, but I've faced persecution. I've had people say bad things about me. We all have. Everybody in this movement who is trying to speak the truth is being come up against this persecution and hatred. And I think that's a good sign. If we are conforming to the world and if we're not experiencing persecution and hatred, we've probably got it wrong if we're Christians. That's how I've seen things. So, this people honours me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Now, there were these two images that just absolutely chilled my heart when I saw them, both in the newspaper. The first one was a big service thanking the NHS. But the image was just really uncomfortable for me. And then the other one was Christ the Redeemer in Brazil had this big vaccine saves put across it, but then with all these masked people. And it wasn't even vaccines save, it was vaccine saves. So vaccine has become the God. And we're warned all the time, do not follow false religions. And I think we do live in a post-faith world largely, and it feels like we are creating, or we're seeing the creation of a pseudo-religion ideology in front of our eyes. And then I know John talked about this earlier, so I won't talk about it much, but how did we get here? Where Durham Cathedral is demanding COVID passports for Christmas worship. And I don't know, I'm not a pastor, but I thought this was quite a good scripture. I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them. For such persons do not serve our Lord Christ, but their own appetites, and by smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. We must not be naive. We need to take the step back. I think everyone's so caught up in the news, what's going on, what's the latest, what's all the pronouncements. We have to stand back, look at the big picture, because then it is so clear, and do our own research, and trust our own brains, trust our own critical thinking. Don't be told what to think. Go and look it up yourself. So I'd like to finish with an urgent call to the church and people of faith. Things are getting really serious. And I think we're reaching a point of no return where I can only describe what's being created is hell on earth, to be honest. This loss globally, there's nowhere to escape to. This is happening everywhere. The fact that you could, I can now see a point where the police could come in and force vaccinate you. Because the hate speech, the division that's being stirred up is getting really quite out of control. The church has a role to speak an eternal perspective to the world, and I felt very, very let down actually, and abandoned and disenfranchised throughout this by the church. That's been actually the only thing that's made me frightened, because we know God has not given us a spirit of fear. He's given us power, love, and a sound mind. But conversely, when we are in fear, we are victims. We don't have power. We cannot love properly. We don't know how to love, and we don't have a sound mind. We make really bad decisions. And yes, the silence during the pandemic has been deafening from the church. So I think there's an urgent need for spiritual discernment in the face and action in the face of immoral and unethical secular ideology. At this point, are we going to turn a blind eye to the lockdowns of the unvaccinated, or compulsory medical procedures being inflicted onto vulnerable and, powerless people? Or are we going to stand up and say, no, we're drawing a line now, this does not continue, not in my name? We have to learn from history. This has happened before. The two sort of institutions we trust the most, the medical profession, the church, were massively involved in Nazi Germany. We saw that in the Nuremberg trials, the trials of the doctors, but also the vast majority of churches in Germany supported the Nazis. There was only a small section of who actively opposed it. That was the Confessing Church, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was executed for opposing the Nazi ideology. So I think we just have to, we can't be naive. We have to know that any good institution can be sort of deceived into the wrong path, and we just mustn't let that happen again. Because, as Edmund Burke supposedly said, although some people said this wasn't his quote, The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And finally, back to my founding father. This was a doctor, Benjamin Rush. These are quite prophetic words, I think. He said, unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, the time will come when medicine will organise into an undercover dictatorship to restrict the art of healing to one class of men and deny equal privileges to others. The Constitution of the Republic should make a special privilege for medical freedoms as well as religious freedoms. Thank you for listening.